I am going to record this so I can post a link to the video afterwards in case anyone wants to watch it that way. So yeah, feel free to ask questions anytime, type them in, or just ask away. So in general, a lot of this is what we've gone over before. A couple things. The main new things here, we want to say a little bit more about environmental compliance as a result of a meeting we had with the Restore Council and this interagency environmental compliance group that they have set up. And we'll talk again about some of the feedback we've gotten from Council as they previewed applications. And there's a new, there's a little bit of new info on what applications should proceed. So if you are working on applications now, just to be clear on what portions of projects have a green light in terms of being, making sense to proceed in terms of how they were planned in the SEP. And we have a new place to submit grant applications, which you'll see on the grant resources page, and I'll go over that so you know where it is and what to do there. So everything, this is everything that is required to submit a complete grant application. So it's this list of 12 things that shows up at the Gulf Consortium's grant resources page. We have sort of indicated where best available science info should show up. And that shows up in terms of just a sentence referencing some type of peer-reviewed literature or white paper or some type of engineering report. And so that shows up in the project narrative and mostly in the project narrative and the observational data plan is where that shows up. There's a template for all of these things with the exception of the project map and the GIS files. We have either spreadsheets or Word documents. We spend less time on it if you use those templates. So if you just download a template and save it on your county server on your local computer and then save it as something else as you work on the application. But having that same format, having the right content sections, that'll just we'll have to do less adjustments on the applications as they come in. So please do use those templates. Environmental compliance, there's a really big long checklist of these. I think there's like 14 different environmental requirements of different types of acts that might be in play depending on the type of project and where it is. So this is the environmental compliance checklist. Every one of these needs to be, every project application needs this environmental checklist to be completed for engineering and design work or for planning projects that are, preliminary design or feasibility studies. Pretty much everything can be not applicable. And during that engineering and design, that environmental compliance will get resolved or will be demonstrated in some way through getting the necessary permits. But for projects that are actually, turning dirt in some way, some type of construction project, they'll, usually the permit will, you'll need a permit typically, and that permit will usually be, usually provides sufficient demonstration that environmental compliance has been achieved. So we met a couple weeks ago with this group that Restore Council convened, an interagency environmental compliance group. There were a bunch of people from Army Corps, from National Marine Fisheries Service, people from Louisiana's Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, Fish and Wildlife, FDEP. And so it was pretty much all the regulators who might be looking at this. especially at federal level. And it's a really good thing that this group exists, because that will allow us to sort of have these projects vetted early on. So they put together this environmental compliance review matrix. It's just this spreadsheet with a bunch of columns that largely match up with that environmental compliance checklist, and they will be reviewing projects as you submit applications to us. We sort of prepare a little summary info and provide them to this group, and then we will have calls sort of as needed to preview project applications and identify any challenges that might come up. In a lot of, in most situations, we're going to be, your consultant or your county staff or you yourself will probably know whether these, or might know whether these environmental compliance things are in play or what is required. A lot of it has to do with the scope of work and the location. And so for example, if you're in a Coastal Barrier Resources Act, we have the spatial data about where those areas are. If you're connected to the waters of the U.S. or in some way tidally influenced, that's going to matter in terms of the type of permit you need and the type of environmental compliance you need to demonstrate. So if you're not sure, and it's this big, it's all of these things, some of which are maybe pretty familiar to some of us. Some of them are a little more obscure in terms of what needs to be satisfied, or if an act is like invoked or whatever. So if you don't know, and you want to know for sure, check with us, and we will work with this interagency group. It's also, I think you all could be on those calls with the interagency group as your projects sort of get in the queue. There were several cautionary tales that were shared from some of the Army Corps folks that were on the call, basically saying they said a number of times that these pre-application meetings, definitely we need to have the pre-application meetings, meetings before permit work gets started. But even these pre-application meetings, like through this interagency group, are very much encouraged, because they can make sure design happens in a way that will help the permitting happen more easily. So for example, if you need to have seagrass surveys done, they need to be done at a certain time of year. Likely the surveyors will know that, or your consultant will know that, but it's good if we get as much information as we can, so we're kind of managing that correctly. There was one of the Army Corps folks mentioned a pretty sizable project, I think, in Louisiana that involved, it was already designed and was really far down the road. Design was done, and there was some type of trenching to, I think, put in a pipeline, but because of where it was, they were not going to be able to get the permit needed because of that trenching, and it should have been designed with directional drilling instead. And so it was a whole, it was a big dollar project, and it was a whole big deal that kind of got derailed. So their message was, like, check in with this group as early as we can to make sure design is proceeding in the right way. So I guess for now, as project applications come in, we're going to be previewing those with this environmental compliance interagency group, and we invite you to participate in that as well. So yeah, I just got a question that came through. We will have audio of this available, and I'll post these slides on our website after we get off here, and I'll also post a link to a video as well. So any questions on environmental compliance? Okay. So just moving on to a few things, some of the info we've gotten from Council, from Restore Council, as they have previewed some of the application materials that have come in. One bit of advice is they suggested, wherever possible, if we can say these projects that have some type of leveraged funding source, where there's some other grant funds or some other county funds or whatever that are paying for something, if there's a way to separate the effort in some way, so that Restore Council knows exactly, if they're contributing $500,000 and the work is, the total project work is $4 million, they want to know exactly what their $500,000 pays for, and if it can be some complete portion of the project, that helps a lot in being able to call something builds on other work. So if there's a way to separate engineering and design milestones, or if there's a way to separate construction into sort of discrete finished portions, that is helpful in being able to describe exactly what the money is paying for. Any questions about separation of effort in that kind of narrative? So that's going to show up in the project narrative and in the budget narrative, describing, the Pot 3 request, what that's paying for, and what some other funds might be paying for separately. If in situations where you can't sort of realistically say it builds on other work, if you can't separate the work effort in some way, we call it co-funded. That means we have to track all of the funding has to be tracked and reported on. So the Gulf Consortium would have to report on the FDEP funds or the some kind of water management district funds. We'd have to do financial and performance reporting on that, as well as on the Restore fund. So it just kind of adds adds some overhead costs. So if we can avoid that, we can't always avoid it probably, but if we can, we should. Every grant application needs a metric. So these are standard Restore Council metrics that you can see on the Grant Resources website. The official final table is called this Metrics Choices table. It's a PDF that lists all of the types of metrics. There's also a spreadsheet up there with council suggested metrics, and some of those are new metrics that council is in the process of adding. And so they've reviewed all the SEP project descriptions and made recommendations about project metrics. They're looking at these in terms of a complete project. So a metric, so they're not looking at separate project milestones having separate metrics. If we are doing a project application for some planning work or engineering and design work, we do need a metric associated with that. Your metric will be something like the number of engineering and design plans delivered. And your success criteria is 1 if there's just 1, or if you have maybe like 30% and 90% in final plans, your success criteria would be 3. You'd have those 3 different levels of complete design plans being delivered. So, feel free to talk with me about that, or, give us a call and we can talk through which metrics make the most sense. The choice of metrics will influence your observational data plan, of course. So that's where that's a big place the metrics show up, with all the supporting info about how we're measuring things connected to each metric. So there are examples on the Grant Resources website So at this link here, there are several examples of, under the guidance documents, there are examples of completed observational data plans with different types of, for planning projects, for implementation projects, so please look at those. You can also look at, for projects that we have applications for, let me know. I can send you examples of observational data plans. There was one in the board packet that was sent out last week for Pasco County's Hudson Reef Artificial Reef Project. You can see a complete application in there, including the ODP. So for each metric, you're going to have some supporting measures. Your measure might be very similar to the metric. You know, if you're here, this describes your metric is number of studies or models used to inform management. So this would be the metric if you're doing a feasibility study, for example. And here they have two different types of reports, the data collection report and the preliminary design report. Those are your supporting measures that gets you to your success criteria of 2 reports compiled. And this is all something, you know, we didn't make this up. This is all council required stuff here. So, and they need it for all the projects. If we don't meet the success criteria, so every metric has, you know, its official metric in the name and also a numeric success criteria. So like acres of wetland restored, for example, if we say we're going to restore 200 acres and we don't, you know, we only restore 100, that's okay. You still get reimbursed for the project. We just kind of have to explain why. And part of that observational data plan has place for narrative in there about contingency plans and kind of adaptive management, basically, if what the plans are if things aren't looking the way we expected them to look. So there's a place for that in the observational data plans. And please do start with the metrics, suggestions, and new metrics spreadsheet on the Grant Resources website. Another important thing to mention here is the period of performance. So the project, this is just the time between the project start date and end date. So we need to know those start dates and end dates. The start dates will actually, you don't need to worry too much about the start date because, well, you sort of do. The start date will actually be about the time you submit your application to us, because we will then get authorized, we will then request authorization of pre-award costs. So that pre-award cost authorization actually means the start date happens sort of right away or very soon. But that doesn't mean you can start working on stuff and have it be reimbursable. So if you want to, so we'll get to that next. And the project end date is a realistic estimate of when you think it will end. It's probably better to, you know, add some cushion on the end of the project date, because if work is still proceeding and you still want things to be reimbursable, we'd have to do some kind of amendment or no cost extension to move that project end date out. So we want to allow time for things to not work well, or for delays, and especially for project closeout. So we need to just be sort of generous in our project end dates. So if you want to start something right away, let us know. If there's additional funding, that sort of helps. You know, there are 2 options. You could separate the Pot 3 funded portion into distinct deliverables, or there's actually more than 2 options, or you could just wait and wait till we have an award, or you could prepare a pre-award letter with us specifying why work needs to start now, how much money would be needed, the type of work. To do that, we'll need a subrecipient agreement in place between the county and the consortium. We don't have those yet, so if we want if you want to do pre-award work, we need to get working on those subrecipient agreements for counties to have allowable pre-award costs. And if there's not additional funding from some other leverage source, you either need to just wait or work on the pre-award letter, like we talked about. Any questions on period of performance? Okay, so the next recommended date to submit project applications is the end of this month, April 26th. You don't need to wait until then. It's a little easier on us if applications sort of trickle in rather than getting like 10 of them at the end. That also allows us to preview them with Restore Council before getting them into RAMs and before moving too far along with things. So when we discussed this back in November, we talked about only certain types of project applications would be proceeding at each recommended deadline. We're dropping that guidance and just saying whatever milestones are expected to start in 2019 or 2020. If you go, let me just navigate to this site here. Okay, so if you go to that kind of data, if you go to that dashboard right here, this link, that takes you to this web interface. So for some reason it always starts at page 6. There are 6 pages in this thing. So this table here is every project in the SEP, every project in the final SEP, its total cost and its pot 3 cost. And so and there's also a starting year, so that means, well, it's just the beginning year of that project, like when some portion of work was expected to begin in that project. If you drag this year start slider to only look at 2019 through 2020, so now this table is updated to only have projects that start in 2019 or 2020. You see the pot 3 amount is 235 million. So that's why projects were chopped up into pieces by milestone type, and why things are proceeding that way, because there's about 74 million in the trust fund, so we couldn't, if all the project applications came in for full projects, that amount would be exceeded. So if you go to page 1, you can see the project milestones. We're essentially saying, just look at anything that's supposed to start in the first 2 years. That amounts to about 80 million in project milestones. And those are the project milestones that are good to go in terms of preparing grant applications. We don't want separate applications for every milestone. Here, for example, in Franklin County for their Emergency Operations Center, this feasibility study, preliminary design, and final design can be a single application. And there have also been some counties that have been shifting project timing around. So if you have a project that's supposed to start in 2030, but you would like to start it now, and you have other projects that are supposed to start now that you want to start later, that's okay. We need to talk about it and look at it to make sure we're not at risk of exceeding the trust fund balance. If we start a bigger project sooner, it's not going to squeeze any counties out if we make awards, or if council makes awards up to whatever our trust fund amount is over the next year or two. So we should talk about that, but it is an option for shifting around the timing if that's something you need to do. So, yeah, please do talk with us about what projects you want to proceed with. It helps to just have a quick chat about it and make sure it all makes sense before we get too far down the road. So to submit a grant application, there's a new way to do that now. We have a grant management system that's been implemented. So this, this link is on the website. The reason for the grant management system is so that all of the project applications and all of the post-award stuff, like the annual reporting, payment requests, all of that, we want to just keep that out of our email boxes as much as possible. So if that's all tracked and linked in this system, that should save us time. So that's the reason for it. It also sort of demonstrates to council that we have things in place to responsibly manage projects. There's just less of a risk of something being lost if it's just not being tracked in email and going back and forth from email to spreadsheets and stuff. So that should help and hopefully will save us money. We will be revisiting this, probably annually. We have an annual contract to pay for the licensing for this software. We're not committed to it for any more than a year. And so if there's a cheaper solution or if there's a way we could all be in grant solutions, eventually, Restore Council hasn't made the switch to grant solutions yet. That should be coming sometime in the next year. They also said that wouldn't work for us at this point in terms of being able to have the kind of back end control that we need, but we'll be reviewing that to see what the options are. But for now, this link is on the Gulf Consortium page on the Grant Resources Gulf Consortium page, and it's very similar to how we have been getting applications. It's mostly just attaching files, attaching your budget narrative. The main difference here is before you do an application, you need to make a profile, which means you add an email address, your address, phone number, and you need a password. And so you have to log into this system now before submitting an application. If you want, so your login, you're only going to see the grant applications associated with your login, with your email and password. So if you want 2 or 3 of you from the county to be able to get into this system, I would recommend you have, use someone's email, or if you have some shared email, use that and use a password you don't use for anything else. So if you want to have 2 or 3 people sharing this login, please be cautious about the security there, but that's what you need to do to have a shared, to be able to see applications coming from different people at your county. So make a profile, then you add an application by just clicking on this pencil and paper icon, and that will get you started. Once you, after you do your application, meaning you fill everything out, you attach everything that is required, and you save it, it'll take you back to the home page, and you'll see if everything is there in the application, all the required attachments are there, all the required boxes are filled in terms of start date, end date, that kind of stuff. Then you'll have this green submit button, and you can click submit, and then it'll show up here. It'll show up here as an application on your home page, and you'll be able to see the status of it. So there's a place in there where we can make notes or send some info to you, within the system for whatever's needed. So it's largely the same in terms of the interface, but you have to make a profile and you have to log in now. We do have an application in through this new system. I mean, we've tested it, and we also have had Collier County got an application in last week, so things are working there. So, but let me know if you have any trouble with making a profile or getting things uploaded in that system. It is something we have control over, so we can fix stuff if something doesn't work. Any questions about which projects should proceed, which applications should proceed? Or any questions about submitting the applications through this new system? Okay, well, that's what we wanted to cover. Please do give me a call if you have questions about anything. I'll post these slides, and I'll post a link to a video of this, of what we just went through here. I'll post those on the website sometime today. So,
Dan, this is Jim Muller. Is this the exact same PowerPoint you posted from 328?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
okay.
yeah, but it's already posted. Yeah, there's no difference. I will. Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. So this PowerPoint is on the website under presentations. So it's there. It's just dated 3/28. So yeah. I will go ahead and post I don't think I posted the environmental compliance thing. Yeah, I will post we have the environmental compliance checklist, but they're, that we're completing, but that interagency group review matrix has a slightly different, it's the same, it's addressing that same checklist, but they have some notes and stuff in there for some of the projects they've previewed. So I will go ahead and post that so you can see what that looks like, especially for, I think they previewed 5 of the applications. So when this group got set up, we had 5 applications in from you all, and we put together some summary info on those and sent it to them, so you can see what comments they've made about those 5 projects, which will kind of help inform maybe the kind of information we need to get to this interagency group as things proceed. So okay, well, that's it. Let me know if you have questions, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dan.